that reflects high unpaid failure as presuming Have you tried looking at that?
Oh, that is a good question. In fact, we are using the pay fairness as a proxy for the end. So it might be good in terms of maybe validating the measure to look at, do they also have high social score? And that is something we can look at reference for that. Thank you very much.
This is a question related to the measure of pay fairness. I think the fairness is a relative to special relative to peers or relative to the CEOs or other competitors. So whether you have considered looking at the CEO pay ratio or the ratio of competitive competition to the recompense for the company.
Yeah, so that is what the prior studies have looked at, and in fact, the study that we cited that was published in the accounting review that found no association. They themselves pointed out that the channels through which this ratio would affect firm value is not clear, right? I mean, if I don't know my CEO pay, how would it affect my performance? And it is the performance that drives the value. So they themselves pointed out, and we agree because, I mean, as I said, I don't wake up to say how much is my CEO pay, how much is my pay, and if there was that differential, then I check. Versus how much do I bring on the table versus how much I'm paid. But then the criticism of our measure is that it's not also at the employee level, right? Because we can't observe the individual employee level. And even if we can observe that too, we still have to aggregate it at the firm level in order to do this kind of study, right? So there's a multiple way of looking at it. We believe that a way of saying my input versus my output drives value is more persuasive to say my ratio to the CEO that I don't even know how it drives my effort. So maybe what you're saying is that maybe we can also look at our measure, we can also look at the short-termism analysis to see if we do that with the ratio, how does it also turn out? And which is
maybe a total measure could be based on the Glassdoor reviews. We can just do some cross-touch analysis and see the employees' comments and the perceptions of how well they are paid fairly.
Yeah, we've talked about even doing the survey to see about this issue, employee comments and all that, to see whether they think about this, whether their input versus their output also come up to support the empirical research for empirical finding.
Great, thank you. I saw a few more people walk in, so I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Maria Farkowski. I'm a PhD student at Chicago Booth, and I'm happy to be here today to present some work with another PhD student at Chicago Booth, Christiana Vizinova. Our work is called Paying for CSR, Firm and Peer Group Effects. And I will tell you this is very much a work in progress that we're working to improve, so we'd really appreciate hearing some of your feedback today. And I'll also give you the caveat that I am an ESG dabbler. I got into the space through this paper, mainly through kind of the compensation and incentives channel, and so it's been really interesting to just learn more about this literature, and I'm hoping to learn more about this space through this conference. So there's been an increasing prevalence of the use of CSR, or corporate social responsibility-based compensation, within the last few decades, and this is both globally as well as in the US. And the specific focus of the paper today will be focusing on US firms. And so looking into the compensation discussion and analysis sections of firms' proxy statements, there's more discussion of different components of CSR performance, like diversity metrics or carbon emissions. And there are also specific targets that executives are being rewarded on in their compensation plans. And And so what we wanted to do, you can also see the graph on the left here. So this is based off of our sample, and you can see that in terms of the percentage of firms that have this kind of CSR-based compensation, starting in 2007, it's very, very low, but getting up to 2021, over 30% of the firms in our sample have some sort of discussion of CSR-based compensation in their proxy statement. So clearly it's been growing in popularity. And what we wanted to do in this paper is think about CSR-based compensation in the context of the incentive framework and multitasking literature. So if we pay a manager on something relating to CSR performance, and we also pay a manager on some measure relating to financial performance, are those two tasks, if we want to think about it that way, complements? Do they work together? Or are they substitute? So working on one takes time and maybe efforts away from the other. And so we also wanted to think about this in the signaling perspective too, because prior work has shown that while the frequency of, the prevalence of firms using this kind of compensation has increased over time, the actual amount of money that is tied to CSR-based goals in executive compensation contracts is very, very small. And so maybe there's this aspect of signaling or greenwashing, wanting to be perceived as a good firm. And you can see this in the example of a couple of the companies that I've shown here. So Chipotle makes a very big deal about issuing a press release to talk about all of the ESG goals that their executive compensation is tied to. Similarly, MasterCard has introduced some social and climate goals for their executives in their compensation plans. So thinking about those two things together, what we want to understand is how does the adoption of CSR-based compensation impact subsequent firm CSR and financial performance? And we also want to understand if there's a differential effect within a peer group. So thinking about if you're a first adopter, if you're one of the first of your peers to adopt this kind of compensation, or if you're a follower, perhaps you've seen someone else do it, you're facing pressure from your shareholders or maybe a compensation consultant to introduce these kinds of measures or goals into your compensation contracts. So in terms of the ways that we build on prior work, there has been work in this area looking at CSR-based compensation, again, due to its increased popularity. A lot of the earlier work in this area focuses on S&P 500 firms, which is interesting, but it also is a very specific group of large firms, right? We can think of them as some of our best performing firms, maybe those that are most well known and subject to these kinds of pressures from shareholders and from the media. And while there has been more recent work, the Cohen et al. Paper in JAR in 2022 that uses a larger sample of firms, their focus was more on understanding what are the determinants of firms adopting CSR-based compensation. And so we wanted to build on that work and really use a larger, more representative group of firms to try to be able to say something a bit more general about the overall effects of firms adopting this kind of CSR-based compensation. And so the sample that we use in our paper consists of almost 6,000 different US firms. And so we think that this is a more representative sample than what some of the prior work has used. In addition, we want to focus on what happens after the initial adoption of this compensation. We've seen some descriptive evidence that the use of this kind of compensation is very sticky. So once a firm adopts these kinds of measures, begins to pay on them, begins to report on them, that continues. They continue to pay their executives on these types of goals and discuss CSR-based performance in the context of compensation. And so we really want to see what happens after a firm shifts and decides this is something that's important, this is something that we want to pay our executives on, and so what happens after that initial decision as opposed to looking at each individual year or period of time in which a firm uses this kind of compensation. And overall, I don't think that we have an answer yet. I'm not saying that our paper is the answer. I think that we just contribute to kind of this mixed debate. Even compensation aside, there's been a lot of work trying to understand, are CSR performance and financial performance connected? And even in the compensation space, there's mixed evidence as to whether the introduction of this kind of compensation is positively or negatively associated with firm value and with market returns. So we're looking to add a bit to this debate and to this discussion. So I want to walk you through, in as much detail as I can in a short amount of time, kind of the way that we go about answering this question and the types of data that we use. So what we do is we go through all of Edgar, all of the proxy statements that are in Edgar, and we get the text of the compensation discussion and analysis sections of these proxy statements. And we work on identifying firms not only that use this type of CSR-based compensation, but also the first time in which they adopt it. And the way that we do this is by creating a dictionary of a lot of different terms under a lot of different topic areas. So we're trying to include environmental topics, social topics, governance topics, things like employee safety, all of these things that have kind of been established in the prior literature relating to corporate social responsibility. I will note that one kind of topic area that we exclude is customer satisfaction, which we didn't find as much to fit as well under that kind of corporate or social responsibility umbrella. So now once we do that, we want to now kind of put together our research design, but obviously there's some endogeneity concerns, right? This isn't being imposed upon firms. Firms themselves are choosing to incorporate CSR-based considerations in their compensation contracts. And we see that the firms that choose to do these are these better firms. They're financially better performing. Again, other papers have gone a lot into the different determinants of why firms choose to adopt these, but it does seem like it's the better financially performing firms that choose to do so. And so obviously we can't fully alleviate these endogeneity concerns, but we try to do our best by creating entropy balanced control groups for use of different design. So basically each of our stats is a single year, and we'll be comparing firms that adopt CSR-based compensation for the first time as compared to a control group of firms that have never adopted CSR-based compensation, and we'll be comparing the 3 years before and after in our design. And what are we looking to see? We're looking to see what happens for these firms in terms of two kind of areas here, which is CSR performance. So this is kind of just answering the question of, do incentives work? Once we pay someone to do something on CSR, do they actually do it, and does their CSR performance improve? And so in terms of what we use to measure CSR performance, right now we're measuring a few different measures of CSP scores from a couple of different providers. And then we also want to understand what happens to these firms financially. What happens to their financial performance? And the way that we do that is by using several different income statement measures, kind of moving up to try to get more at a firm's kind of core operating income. So starting at the bottom line with net income, and we also use EBIT as well as kind of an operating income measure, I think we use before depreciation. And then lastly, we want to understand, okay, maybe we're going to find some effects here, which we do, and I will talk about that in a slide or two. We also want to understand if there's a differential effect within peer groups. So what we mean by that is that firms are required to disclose in their proxy statements who their compensation peers are, so who they benchmark their own compensation practices against. And so we use those groups to identify who it is this year, and so who the first